Every day they manipulate your life. How narcissists control you without you even noticing. Narcissists are not a monolith. Psychologists often differentiate between grandiose or malignant narcissists and vulnerable or covert narcissists, and understanding this distinction is crucial to decoding their behaviors. Grandiose narcissists rely on overt, aggressive manipulation tactics. They dominate, intimidate, and control in ways that are impossible to ignore. Covert narcissists, on the other hand, operate with a subtlety so refined it can slip under the radar, leaving their victims questioning whether they are even being manipulated. The clinical term vulnerable narcissism describes individuals who crave control and validation but do so through passive and psychologically insidious means. Miller et al., 2011. Today, we'll explore 7 subtle manipulation tactics commonly used by covert narcissists and the psychological reasoning behind them. 1. Passive-aggressive behaviors, the masked weapon. One of the covert narcissist's signature tactics is passive aggression, a psychological strategy used to express anger or resentment indirectly while maintaining a facade of politeness or cooperation. According to Dr. Les Carter, passive aggression allows the narcissist to punish or frustrate without taking responsibility, keeping the power dynamic firmly in their favor. You might notice delayed responses, subtle criticisms, or small sabotages, all executed in a way that preserves their innocent image. Psychologically, this creates cognitive dissonance for the victim. You feel the resentment, the subtle hostility, but the narcissist denies it, leaving you to question your own perception. Over time, this undermines self-confidence and erodes trust in your own judgment, making you more dependent on their approval while they remain untouched by accountability. 2. Playing the psychologist, conditional future faking. Covert narcissists often adopt the guise of a therapist or observer, positioning themselves above you by analyzing your flaws, motivations, and behavior in subtle, critical ways. As clinical psychologist Dr. Craig Malkin notes, this tactic feeds the narcissist's need for control by creating an imbalance where the victim feels perpetually flawed. You are made to believe that your mistakes and insecurities are the cause of their distance, dissatisfaction, or even subtle disdain. This tactic often manifests as conditional future faking. They promise a return to the blissful love-bombing stage if only you correct yourself, implying that the perfect relationship or future is contingent upon your self-improvement. Psychologists highlight that this is particularly insidious because it ties your self-worth directly to their approval. No matter how much you change, the goalposts shift, leaving you chasing an ideal that is inherently unattainable. Dr. Sam Vaknin, a prominent narcissism researcher, explains that this maintains a cycle of dependency and self-doubt, trapping victims in a psychological loop where they constantly attempt to please a partner whose satisfaction is never fully attainable. The covert narcissist gains control without ever overtly exerting force. The victim internalizes the manipulation as self-failure. The consequences of these tactics are profound. Victims often experience chronic self-doubt, anxiety, and a diminished sense of agency. Passive aggression creates an environment of uncertainty, while conditional future faking fosters relentless guilt and obsessive self-monitoring. According to Dr. Wendy Behoy, therapy strategies such as cognitive restructuring, boundary setting, and reality check exercises are essential tools for reclaiming autonomy. Recognizing that the narcissist's behavior is a reflection of their pathology, not a mirror of your inadequacy, is the first critical step towards psychological freedom. In essence, understanding the subtle strategies of covert narcissists allows victims to reclaim their perception of reality. Awareness dismantles the illusion, empowering you to set firm boundaries and detach emotionally. Where once manipulation dictated your decisions, insight and therapeutic intervention restore agency and confidence. 3. Guilt tripping and shaming, the invisible leash. Among covert narcissists, one of the most insidious tactics is the weaponization of guilt and shame. Psychologists describe this as a hallmark of manipulative behavior in vulnerable narcissists. Carter, 2019, Campbell and Miller, 2011. Unlike overt aggression, which is visible and confrontational, this type of manipulation is subtle, emotionally covert, and often leaves the victim questioning their own moral compass. Imagine this scenario. A narcissist asks for your help, and for legitimate reasons, you cannot comply. A typical person would accept your boundaries and move on. not the narcissist. Instead, they deploy a psychological arsenal designed to make you feel like a monumental failure. You might hear phrases like, "I've always been there for you. I just thought you could do this one thing for me." On the surface, it sounds reasonable, even caring. But beneath the words is a hidden avalanche of obligation and emotional coercion. Psychologists note that covert narcissists leverage your empathy and moral self-image as levers of control. Your desire to see yourself as a good, caring, and empathetic person becomes the very rope they use to bind you to their will. This tactic has profound psychological effects. According to Dr. Craig Malkin, a narcissism researcher, when victims are repeatedly subjected to guilt and shaming, it creates a form of learned compliance. Over time, you start to internalize the belief that your needs, preferences, or limitations are inherently wrong or insufficient. Your self-esteem erodes quietly but steadily. You begin to obsessively question, "Am I doing enough? Am I failing again?" This is classic narcissistic gaslighting combined with moral manipulation, a relentless strategy to keep you tethered emotionally. The narcissist escalates the manipulation in a predictable pattern. If gentle guilt fails to produce compliance, they shift to overt shaming. They amplify your perceived failures, exaggerate betrayals, and frame your boundaries as evidence of moral weakness or emotional insufficiency. Psychologists refer to this as moral emotional exploitation, where the narcissist weaponizes your values, ethics, and empathy against you. You are repeatedly pressured to prove your goodness by putting their needs above your own, always, at any cost. The cycle is exhausting. The more you give, the more they demand. Psychologists warn that this establishes a feedback loop where your desire to be a good, ethical, and empathetic person, the very traits that make you human, are hijacked as a leash for control. Carter, 2019. Victims become trapped in a relentless pattern of attempting to validate their worth, constantly trying to fix situations, appease the narcissist, or restore a sense of equilibrium, all while the narcissist continues to evade responsibility and accountability. Understanding the psychological mechanisms at play is critical for recovery. Experts like Dr. Wendy Behori emphasize the importance of boundary reinforcement and cognitive reframing. Recognize that guilt induced by a narcissist is manufactured. It is not a reflection of your moral failing. When you resist the urge to over-apologize or overcompensate, you begin reclaiming autonomy. Journaling your experiences, seeking validation from trusted sources, and engaging in therapy can help you disentangle your self-worth from the narcissist's manipulative narrative. Over time, awareness acts as a shield. Knowing that the guilt, shame, and moral coercion are strategic tools rather than reflections of your inadequacy empowers you to break the cycle. You are no longer compelled to bend to the narcissist's will to prove your goodness. Psychologists emphasize that reclaiming your agency is the most effective form of protection. It disrupts the power dynamic and re-establishes your self-esteem, which the narcissist can no longer manipulate. In essence, what seems like subtle emotional pressure is actually a profound form of control that relies on your empathy, morality, and desire to do good. Recognizing the patterns, understanding the psychology behind them, and implementing concrete strategies to protect yourself allows you not only to survive but to thrive. The leash is invisible, but the moment you understand how it operates, you can finally cut it and reclaim your freedom. 4. Strategic empathy and bogus apologies, the deceptive mask of care. Among covert narcissists, one of the most insidious and overlooked tactics is the deployment of strategic empathy and calculated apologies. Psychologists like Dr. Craig Malkin and Dr. Wendy Behori describe this as a hallmark of manipulative behavior in vulnerable narcissists. Unlike overt aggression or obvious manipulation, this strategy operates under the guise of care, concern, and understanding, but it is a carefully constructed illusion designed to serve the narcissist's agenda. Imagine this scenario. You arrive home after an exhausting day at work, carrying the weight of a conflict with a colleague. You confide in your partner, who happens to be a covert narcissist. They lean in, nod attentively, offer the right words of support, even mirror your emotions. On the surface, they appear empathetic. Psychologists explain that this is instrumental empathy. It is not motivated by genuine concern but by the desire to gain your trust, collect personal information, or appear favorable in public. Later, When a conflict arises with them, the same narcissist may weaponize that very information, presenting it as evidence that you are emotionally unstable, overreactive, or fundamentally flawed. This manipulation leaves victims questioning their own memory and perception, a psychological phenomenon often linked to gaslighting. Sweet, 2019. Bogus apologies are another tool in their repertoire. A true apology, according to psychologists, involves acknowledgement of wrongdoing, acceptance of responsibility, and a commitment to change. Covert narcissists, however, offer what appears to be remorse but is actually a calculated tactic. Their apologies are rarely about guilt or accountability. They are about controlling the narrative. Consider this. You discover your narcissistic partner texting another person in an online affair. When confronted, they might say, "I'm sorry, but at least I never met up with him," or "I'm sorry, but you're never around to support me." Psychologists call this deflection and minimization. The apology shifts the focus from their transgression to your perceived shortcomings. The narcissist avoids accountability, maintains the illusion of moral superiority, and manipulates you into accepting the bare minimum of acknowledgement. The impact on the victim is profound. Dr. Ramoni Dervisula explains that when victims receive these hollow gestures of empathy or fake apologies, it creates an emotional trap. The victim feels morally compelled to forgive, second-guessing their boundaries, and often internalizing responsibility for the narcissist's misdeeds. Over time, this erosion of self-trust can lead to chronic self-doubt, heightened anxiety, and even depressive symptoms. You begin to wonder if your standards are unreasonable, if your expectations for accountability are too high, or if your perception of reality is flawed. Recognizing this pattern is crucial. Psychologists emphasize the importance of differentiating occasional human error from pathological narcissistic behavior. Anyone can offer a half-hearted apology from time to time, but a consistent inability to genuinely acknowledge wrongdoing, coupled with a habit of deflecting blame and emotionally invalidating others, is a red flag of covert narcissism. Recovery and protection strategies include cultivating emotional boundaries, practicing cognitive reframing, and seeking external validation from trusted, non-manipulative sources. Therapy, journaling, and reflective practices help victims re-establish their internal compass and resist being drawn into manipulative cycles. In essence, strategic empathy and fake apologies are not signs of kindness. They are instruments of control, designed to destabilize you emotionally while preserving the narcissist's sense of untouchable self-righteousness. Understanding this allows you to step back, recognize manipulation for what it is, and reclaim your emotional autonomy. Awareness is your first defense. Boundaries are your shield, and consistent self-validation is your liberation. 5. Stonewalling, the silent weapon of emotional manipulation. Stonewalling, in the context of narcissistic abuse, is one of the most subtle yet devastating tools a covert narcissist employs. Psychologists such as Dr. John Gottman define stonewalling as the act of withdrawing from meaningful engagement, refusing to communicate, and shutting down emotionally in response to conflict. This behavior often manifests as ignoring you, leaving the room mid-conversation, offering monosyllabic responses, changing the subject abruptly, or using sarcasm to deflect attention. For the narcissist, stonewalling is not merely avoidance. It is a deliberate strategy to exert control and destabilize the victim. According to Dr. Ramoni Dervisula, covert narcissists often use these silent tactics to manipulate others into emotional submission, creating confusion, self-doubt, and frustration. By withholding engagement, they establish a dynamic where the victim constantly tries to coax a response, exhausting themselves mentally and emotionally. However, it is crucial to distinguish between the narcissist's stonewalling and the victim's self-protective withdrawal. Victims often resort to their own form of stonewalling after repeated attempts to communicate and resolve conflicts are met with dismissal, blame-shifting, or escalating drama. Over time, they learn that engaging with a narcissist does not lead to understanding or compromise. It only invites more manipulation and emotional turmoil. Psychologists describe this as an adaptive coping mechanism, a necessary step toward emotional survival. By disengaging, victims create a boundary to preserve their psychological well-being and prevent further trauma. Yet, when a victim, particularly in the context of a female covert narcissist, starts asserting these boundaries, the narcissist may weaponize the victim's protective behaviors against them. They accuse the victim of lacking emotional capacity, being cold or unloving, or failing to hold space for their needs. Psychologists explain this as projection and triangulation. The narcissist projects their emotional emptiness onto the victim while simultaneously invalidating the victim's feelings. The result is a cruel paradox. The victim is expected to provide emotional support endlessly while being denied the same consideration in return. 6. Implied threats. The subtle loom of anxiety. Another hallmark of covert narcissistic manipulation is the use of implied threats, sometimes called covert intimidation. This tactic relies on vague statements or insinuations designed to create uncertainty, anxiety, and a sense of inadequacy in the victim. Dr. Craig Malkin notes that covert narcissists often exploit fear and insecurity as tools of control, making the victim hypervigilant and emotionally malleable. Imagine the scenario. You are constantly bending over backwards to meet your narcissistic partner's demands, anticipating every need, giving all your energy, and yet receiving little acknowledgement. Instead of gratitude, the narcissist drops a subtle bomb. "You're lucky I'm still here because no one else would put up with this," or "I could easily find someone who truly appreciates me and gives me what I need." Even more insidious, they may imply that no one else would want you, eroding your self-esteem while simultaneously inflating their own sense of control. Psychologists explain that these implied threats are a form of emotional triangulation. By creating a false narrative of scarcity, suggesting that you are replaceable or unworthy, they manipulate your behavior without ever issuing an overt demand. This leaves the victim constantly second-guessing themselves, anxious about the future, and striving for approval that is never genuinely offered. The narcissist gains power without confrontation, keeping the victim emotionally off balance and perpetually seeking validation. Experts suggest several ways to navigate these tactics safely. For stonewalling, maintaining your emotional boundaries is critical. Recognize when disengagement is a form of self-preservation rather than failure. Dr. Susan Forward emphasizes journaling or talking with trusted confidants to validate your experience and counteract self-doubt. For implied threats, the first step is to label the behavior. Understanding that these statements are manipulative, not factual reflections of your worth, is crucial for regaining psychological autonomy. Cognitive behavioral strategies, such as reframing thoughts and challenging the distorted narrative, can help victims resist internalizing the narcissist's insidious messages. Seeking therapy from professionals experienced in narcissistic abuse recovery, like Dr. Ramoni Dervisula, provides additional tools to rebuild self-esteem and develop boundaries that the narcissist cannot violate. Stonewalling and implied threats are not simply annoying behaviors, they are deliberate mechanisms of control designed to erode your confidence, manipulate your decisions, and maintain dominance. Understanding the psychology behind these actions transforms fear into awareness and empowers victims to reclaim their emotional sovereignty. 7. Intermittent reinforcement, the narcissist's most dangerous weapon. Among all the covert tactics a narcissist employs, intermittent reinforcement stands out as perhaps the most insidious and psychologically damaging. Psychologists such as Dr. B.F. Skinner and later attachment theorists have studied how unpredictable rewards can hijack the brain's reward system, creating a cycle of craving, dependency, and confusion that is extraordinarily difficult to escape. In the early stages of the relationship, the narcissist floods you with praise, attention, affection, and emotional validation. This love-bombing phase triggers a surge of dopamine and endorphins, flooding your neural pathways with pleasure and a sense of safety. Psychologists explain that this is not mere charm, it's neurochemical conditioning. Your brain begins to associate their approval with feelings of joy, relief, and even self-worth, effectively making them the source of your emotional highs. However, the brilliance and cruelty of intermittent reinforcement lies in its unpredictability. Over time, the narcissist withdraws affection, offers subtle criticism, or engages in silent treatment, creating emotional lows that are just as intense as the highs. According to Dr. Ramoni Dervisula, this unpredictable pattern is a form of operant conditioning. You are trained to chase approval and avoid punishment, which keeps you tethered to the relationship despite repeated harm. This dynamic hijacks your emotional and cognitive processes. You begin to question reality, wondering if the mistreatment is temporary or if the relationship will return to its initial bliss. The highs become addictive, and the lows feel unbearable, producing a psychological roller coaster that erodes self-esteem, self-respect, and self-confidence. Psychologists have found that victims of intermittent reinforcement often experience symptoms similar to addiction withdrawal, including anxiety, obsessive rumination, and even changes in neural pathways related to reward anticipation. For the narcissist, this is a strategic victory. They maintain control not through overt force, but by conditioning you to crave their presence while fearing their absence. It's a subtle, almost invisible form of domination that can leave the victim trapped for years, unable to trust their own perceptions of reality. Experts in narcissistic abuse recovery suggest several ways to counteract this manipulation. First, developing awareness is critical. Understanding that these highs and lows are deliberate and not a reflection of your worth can help break the conditioning. Psychologists recommend journaling experiences of praise versus withdrawal, noting patterns, and identifying triggers that set off emotional highs and lows. Second, emotional regulation techniques, such as mindfulness, cognitive reframing, and grounding exercises, can help you manage the dopamine-driven cravings and anxiety induced by the narcissist's unpredictable behavior. Dr. Craig Malkin emphasizes the importance of rebuilding internal validation, finding sources of self-worth that are independent of the narcissist's approval. Finally, establishing firm boundaries and limiting exposure to the narcissist's manipulations are essential for recovery. Gradually withdrawing attention from the narcissist, seeking therapy, and connecting with supportive communities can rewire your brain's reward pathways, reducing dependence on their intermittent validation and restoring autonomy over your emotions. Intermittent reinforcement is more than a manipulation tactic. It is a calculated hijacking of your emotional and neurological system. Recognizing it, understanding its effects, and implementing strategies for self-preservation can be the first steps toward reclaiming your life, your self-respect, and your freedom.